Starting to record. Okay, we are recording. Welcome, Piotr. Thank you for joining me again.
Thank you, Rob. It's always a pleasure.
And this time, our timetable is reversed. So, do you have coffee?
I finished the coffee, actually. I've got a glass of water.
Okay,
I can go make myself another coffee. But
okay, so last time it was coffee. I had coffee, you had wine. This time you have water, I have beer.
Yes.
So this is the beauty of reversing the time frame. So last time we were talking about, very loosely, we wandered a bit, but we were talking about developing adaptivity and agility, both in organizations and individuals. And like I was just mentioning to you, I think an interesting topic is how specifically individuals can develop a willingness or an openness to exploring struggle or developing tenacity, what's commonly called, or the trendy term is grit. And you know, from some of the things you said last time, I mean, that was your upbringing. You learned that, you know, you learned that something could come from taking on challenge. And growing up, I consider myself, and at times still do consider myself, quite a lazy person. And yet I've learned to appreciate what can come from deliberately going after challenge. So why don't we start with that and
sure,
see where we get with that.
Sure. I think it would be worth to mention the concept of homeostasis, or however you pronounce it in English. In Latin is like that. The concept of a body interacting with the environment and trying to find a balance, I guess. In terms of its temperature, in terms of its energy, to function the best it can function in that specific environment. Now, we do seek homeostasis as well in our relationships, in our work, in our approach to life, I think, generally. So be that, you know, trying to earn decent living so that you don't need to really struggle in the bottom of the Maslow hierarchy, be that finding a partner, a sexual partner or life partner, be that finding work that excites you as well. So we do want to find the right amount of stimuli and the right amount of peace, I guess. Sort of some way in the middle of the challenge and our ability to respond to that challenge. Now, what you call laziness, maybe it's that there are maybe other ways of looking for it. It's just perhaps adjusting to the current environment as it is right now, rather than trying to look for different environments, or rather than trying to look for more stimuli in the same environment. I think we have a choice, right? So when you, as I see myself, the homeostasis is reaching a certain peace of mind, or maybe a mindful state where I'm comfortable with the stimuli around me. So what it means is you can be, you know, you can be sitting on a beach and drinking a cocktail. And it's fine. It's great. You know, it's very important to enjoy the pleasant, peaceful nature of a beach. But you could be also surfing the waves on the same beach and enjoying the adrenaline rush of the speed. You could be driving a car around that beach and enjoying the speed and so on, right? So it's about finding the right stimuli that makes sense for you.
Yeah, although it's interesting, the sort of the metaphor, the situation you were talking about on the beach. What's interesting is you're looking to find an orientation of pleasure to each of those levels of stimulation. And I think what I was talking about in the beginning or opening this conversation is, right now, especially, we're faced with challenge, what many people would characterize as challenge. And so perhaps what you're calling surfing is making a conscious decision to take on this moment as a challenge, as something that can be learned from or enjoyed. So maybe that's it. And how is it that you've learned that challenge can be a good thing? Coming to this idea of homeostasis, I call myself lazy. I'm being a little bit cheeky in that, but I enjoy comfort. I enjoy relaxing, things like that. I also enjoy working, but a lot of times when I take on challenge, it's actually so that I can acclimate to a new level of work and feel comfort in that new level of work or challenge. So
I guess it's about your strategies to find the result that you want. I'm not saying I don't enjoy pleasure. I think everybody does. But what really drives me is getting the desired results the fastest possible. So in a sense, it's a very outcome-driven strategy, and in that sense, I need to be first conscious about what are the best possible outcomes in the current situation. So what can I learn? What can I take away? What can I give in the situation as well? So what's the possible outcome for me? What's the possible outcome for you, for example, in this situation? What's the possible outcome for the people who are listening to this video or watching it? And how can we maximize those outcomes is the thing that I really cherish, I think. And I think we can take the conversation in two directions. One conversation is survival, in a sense, and we as all organisms are a part of the nature, and we survive and we thrive in the nature in one way or another. And we are taught, actually, in the Western, it's not necessarily Western right now, but in the developed country approach to life, that death is a taboo, that we are all almighty and will survive, right? So we watch news about people dying as if it didn't matter for us, right? We watch news about coronavirus casualties, we watch news about war casualties, and it seems like it's not us, right? So we are taught,
it's statistical, right?
Yeah. So we are taught to see death as a thing that doesn't matter for you as an organism, right? And that's a big problem, I think, because we are then less and less conscious of possibilities of death in every moment. For example, possibilities of an earthquake, possibilities of an accident, possibilities of a heart stroke, and so on. So how do you train yourself to see the worst possibilities in any situation, the worst case scenario, and then adapt to that scenario is very important. So I think there's a calculated amount of risk that you can start taking in any scenario, and try to figure out where the risks for your survival actually lie. How much can the situation be stretched by someone who you don't have influence on? So if you're in a bar, someone can come in with a gun and shoot you. Do you know what to do when someone comes in with a gun? In the same way, if you're at work, a client can call you and say, look, this contract is not working for us anymore, and you're losing 50% of your income. Are you prepared to that conversation? So that's in a sense the challenge and the conscious effort to build the grit, I think.
Let me ask you maybe the same question in a different way. You're somebody who, it seems to enjoy taking on challenge and thrives at that, and I've seen that many times over the years. How does somebody, like many people, when faced with challenge, just shut down or run in the other direction or go into denial? How do you believe, perhaps, that you learned to take on challenge, and how do you go about it? This is turning into a little bit of a modeling conversation, but
okay,
yeah, how did that happen for you, that you're like, oh, okay, there's something I can do here, and I don't have to run away necessarily?
Well, I think that that's the second sort of direction we can take the conversation in, which is unfortunately having to adapt, right? Some of us are more fortunate, some of us are less fortunate. There's a separate story about how you create your fortune, how do you build your luck, meaning, how do you build resources around you that actually take you up in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I was, I think, fortunate enough to be born in a very small village where not a single person had been to high school. A village in the countryside in a communist country. When I was 6, the military law was introduced. So I was able to see the misery of life early on. And I was able to see that survival might take some effort. Right? Whereas I think some people are less fortunate, and if they are born in...
I want to interrupt, sorry. So we were talking about that a little bit last time. And so I get that, I get that narrative of being in that difficult circumstance, and that you learned how to take on struggle, and that you were fortunate to be born in that difficult circumstance. I get that. I'm sure there are people that that grew up around you who didn't get the same lesson from it. So yes. I guess I'm looking for some of the nuance of how is it that you kind of went somewhere and actually got educated and learned many languages and got many degrees, whereas other people probably stayed there and just kind of rode the wave.
I think pure luck. I think I had the curiosity. I think that's necessary to look for the basis of self-efficacy, in a sense. So how do I become a bit more confident in the current situation? How do I take control of the current situation? How do I find ways to realize that I can do something without thinking that I'm actually way better than people around me? So how do I strike a balance in terms of delivering the results to a degree that some other people may not be able to deliver those results, but not trying to convince myself that through delivering those results I'm way better than the people around me. So you've got an opposite role model in your current presidential seat, someone who definitely delivered result in his life. Let's not ditch that, but who thinks that he's better than everyone else in this world, right? So through that, what I really, if you look at some things that sort of curated that curiosity, is having imagination. So for example, having imaginary experiences that I could use as a basis for modeling maybe some of the life experiences. So being a child, every child is very imaginative. Every child goes and dreams about reality, and I was able to somehow maintain this imagination until this very moment, and playing with possibilities, imagining various scenarios, thinking of worlds that could be created, thinking of situations that I could put myself through. Still, it hasn't changed since I was maybe 2 years old. So that's one thing. The the second thing is based on those imaginary experiences, also create, well, small hanging fruit, low hanging fruits, I would say. So how do I do something that proves that these imaginary worlds can be created, right? So how do I take a challenge and do something that nobody else has done around me? I'll give you a very simple example. When I was maybe 7 years old, I got extremely interested in botanics, so in plants, and how the flora looks in various parts of the world. And for some reason, I got absolutely obsessed with palm trees. I had never seen a palm tree in my life. Poland is a cold country, and we weren't allowed to go abroad, and we didn't have the money to go abroad. But I always, when I saw a palm tree on TV, I couldn't sleep. So I was. I was always looking for books and maps that could show me where, for example, certain types of palm trees were growing. And my mom, by chance, found this, 2-volume sort of series of books on flora in the world. Very, very sort of simple, I would say maybe sort of university books, and I read those books, and I loved those books, and I found the name of the author. Obviously, I found that he was a professor at a university, so I looked for the address for the university, and I wrote him a letter. And the letter was a simple one question: is show me where palm trees grow. Right, and I actually got a response from him maybe a year or two later with a handwritten map of the reach of palm trees in the world, right? And that taught me something. It taught me that a professor at university can respond to me, even though I'm 7 or 8 years old. If I ask the right question to the right person, I will get the right piece of information that I need. And well, nothing about palm trees that changed my life. I've seen many palm trees. I have one in front of my building right now, living here in this environment. But it created a self-efficacy that if I ask the right question, if I reach for the right resources, I will find myself in the reality where palm trees exist. And this is my daily reality right now. And then also, having 2 other elements that are very important is having some role models, right? So looking for people who maybe didn't become the superheroes in your imaginary world, but they maybe can do one of those things that the superheroes can do, maybe have seen one of those things. And also, the last thing is having someone that really believes in you and says, yes, you can do it. You try more. And I think, the lucky piece, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to say thank you to all my teachers in my primary school. But in the primary school I went to, we had very few students. It's a school in a village next to the village where I grew up. We didn't have students who really liked to learn, unfortunately. People from working class families in the countryside, farmer families, and so on, they didn't really cherish the knowledge that, for example, they can find in a small library in the school. So the teachers said, yes, come, yes, you read more. I see you like this sort of book. Maybe you should read this sort of book as well. Maybe
was your mother fond of reading?
Yeah, well, maybe not my mother, but my father was. So the lucky thing that I think led to where I am as well is that even though my parents were not really educated, I mean they didn't even go to high school. My father, for some reason, loved reading, and as for a home in the middle of nowhere in the forest village, there were always some books at home. For one example is when I was about 3 years old, my father was reading Bible to me. The Bible was actually illegal in the country, not only being, well, communist, but also from a Catholic perspective. So Polish are very Catholic. You don't read Bible. You know, Catholicism is not about questioning your religion. It's about going to the church and praying with the priest.
So that made it much more interesting.
Yeah. So I had this book that I was told that wasn't supposed to be at home and that I was supposed to hide. At night, before I went to bed, maybe not that regularly, but from time to time, my father would pull out the Bible and read me a story of, let's say, Jonah or, someone else. And those stories were actually, if you read Bible in one way or another, and same as with Quran or Torah and some other religious books, they bring you life patterns. They show you metaphors of living and metaphors of success. So I got really interested in those patterns and metaphors, and I asked my father to teach me reading when I was 3 years old. So I could read by the time I read books by the time I was 4 or 5. So when I went to primary school at the age of 7, discovering that there's a library was, an exciting thing. There were, tens or hundreds or thousands more books in the library than in my home.
It's interesting. By the way, the whole story is very interesting. And now I realize which kid you were, because you were the kid who was reading at 3. Yes. I went to school with kids like you. But the other thing is that there's something very fascinating about mingling this idea of danger and the forbidden and challenge. Because if you give somebody a challenge, it can seem like a burden. A challenge can be like many things, right? So it can be a burden, it's a hassle, it's oppression, it's bad luck, it's all these things. But it can also be danger or forbidden or an invitation. So,
well, definitely,
right?
A lot of darkness in my early ages. I think one example I can give you is I loved playing with fire when I was a kid. I was definitely a pyromaniac kid. Any explosion I could create, any bonfire, any sort of burning that could occur. I was on it to the degree that I don't have much recollection, but when I was probably 3 years old, with my cousin living next door, we actually set a barn fire, and that didn't finish well. The barn didn't burn, but my aunt, who owned the barn, quarreled with my mom, and they didn't really like each other. But I think I suspect that accident had actually made their relationship worse than it was. So then for the rest of my childhood, I was always considered as this impish, dangerous kid by the aunt. So my cousin was almost never allowed to play with me, but that created, I think the desire to go out.
Right. There's the forbidden fruit again.
So
the other thing that, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that the other thing that your story, your couple stories, was reminding me of was, I was reading a number of years ago one of the 20 biographies of Richard Branson, and very interesting guy. And one thing that was fascinating was his parents, and especially his mother. They would be driving home, and his mother would just leave him halfway home out of the car and say, "I'll see you at home," at a very young age. And then one day he got up and the mother was like packing his backpack, and he said, "Oh, what are we doing today?" And she said, "You're going to visit your your grandmother." And and he said, "Oh, great. What, like, when are we leaving?" And she said, "No, we're not leaving. You're going to go there on your bicycle." And it was about 50 miles away. And she said, "Have a great journey." And he wasn't quite sure how to get there, but she was constantly throwing these challenges in front of him, and it developed a certain character. And she was running businesses out of their garage. So there was this entrepreneurial spirit as well. So
it's interesting. So I never had this entrepreneurial spirit actualized in my family. And we always were very poor, and my father, mother, and my brothers were, well, factory workers, drivers, and farmers, and sort of, always losing their jobs. And since 1989, when Poland became a capitalist country, actually they realized how much they lost not educating themselves and not going through the pains of development, I guess. But I don't know, for some reason, this conversation, maybe maybe because you're drinking, and I'm sort of modeling that in a sense, so I'm accessing some memories. But I do remember that at a certain age, early on, I read somewhere the concept of a self-made man, which wasn't a very European concept. It must have been a sort of American comic book or something. But in a sense, living in a communist country that didn't allow you to be a self-made man. Having said that, having examples, so seeing people in the town next door, for example, setting up small stores, or seeing people selling some things illegally, making it through the border and buying some things that you couldn't buy in Poland, and selling it on street markets and so on. So those people always excited me, in a sense. So people who are able to to have small businesses run legally or illegally, half, I think. But people who were really really consciously hacking the system. And everybody knew that the political system and the educational system and the economical system in a communist country, practically controlled by the Soviet Union, everybody knew that the system is screwed. And everybody knew that if you want to succeed, you need to take risks, and you need to do something that might not be comfortable. So in Polish, actually, one more realization, there's a word called kombinator. Kombinator is something who is, it's like a tinker. It's someone who's trying things, who's uneasy in a sense, who's looking for new things. And there's a verb that comes with it called kombinować, which is, I'm struggling with the right translation for English, but it's trying to hack the system, and it may not be the right way of doing things. It may not be the sort of well received way of doing things, but it's always a way that brings result. And I realized that this word, I don't hear these words right now when Poland is a capitalist country, when you can become an entrepreneur, and actually many people do. I think the speed of entrepreneurial growth in Poland is tremendous, and the economic growth for the past 20 years or so, more 30 years since the fall of the Iron Curtain is tremendous. But I think it comes actually from that sort of kombinator mentality, where people were forced in the communist country to be on their own and to fight, to look for ways to hack the system, to find some coffee where the when coffee was not in the store, to buy meat when meat was not available, and so on and so on, right? So I think there is this entrepreneurial spirit in me, not in an American sense or the Charles Branson sense, where Charles Manson and Richard Branson sense of having an example of a successful, for example, entrepreneur around them, but just having to look for ways to hack the system, I think creates the same results.
Yeah, and what occurred to me is that the opportunity is that's another example. What you're talking about is another example of kind of the little shoots of growth that happen when the circumstance is oppressive and struggle is imposed on us from external events. And I think the opportunity with this concept of whether it's grit or stoicism or Zen Buddhism is intentionally going after, almost preemptively going after struggle as a way of pursuing opportunities and getting acclimated to, as you were saying, sort of homeostasis. And I would say it's beyond that. It's like homeostasis is, I think we talked about it last time. It's more of a sine curve, right? It's not just resting, but it's the movement between activity and rest. So,
I'd love to say something very sophisticated, but a simple English saying, which is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, is something that I always keep in my mind. And also the fact that the more experiences you have, the more behavioral choices you will have, is something that I really hold dear and really think important in terms of getting to any results. So that's the NLP modeling world, where you have more behavioral choices than any other person in the room, and then you can lead. I think it's just a matter of ethics and really getting your outcomes straight. Do you want to then lead people astray? Do you want to seduce people and cheat people? Or do you want to lead people in a way that everyone will actually benefit from? So I think creating those choices, and then also creating the right mindset, in a sense. What are you really here for? What are you really? What is your presence? What does your presence mean for other people in the room? Is really important.
Well, I think that's a good place to cap it for this evening and this morning in Tokyo. And perhaps next time we can flip again and go back to coffee and red wine. Well, thank you very much. And
thank you,
as
Rob.
they say in yoga, namaste, and thanks.
As they say in English, thank you.
Thank you.